Mosaic. My name is Sharon, and today I will be reading from Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 8 in Chinese. 巴比伦王巴沙塞元年，丹印里在床上做了一个梦，脑中出现了异象，便把梦记录下来，讲述其中的大意。丹印里说：“我在夜间的异象中看见风吹四面吹来，搅动大海。接着4只巨兽从海中上来，各有不同的形状。第一只兽像狮子，但有鹰的翅膀。我观看时，见它的翅膀被拔掉，它被扶起来，像人一样双脚站在地上，并被扶于人的头脑。第二只兽像熊，用2只后腿站立，牙尖叼着3根肋骨。有声音对他说：“起来，多吞吃肉吧。”此后我继续观看，便还有一只像豹一样的兽，背上有4只如鸟一般的翅膀。这兽有4个头，并被扶于冠柄。此后我在夜间的异象中看见第4只兽，恐怖可怕，极其相壮，用大铁牙吞吃，咬碎猎物，用脚践踏所剩的。这兽与前3只兽不同，它有10个角。我观看这些时，见其中长出了个小角，先前的角中有3个被连根拔出，让它取而代之。这小角有人的眼睛和说谎言的口。This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Sharon. Now, have you ever woken up from a nightmare in a deep sweat and your heart is pacing, your wrists are sore from clenching all night, and all you wanted to do was run into your mom and dad's bedroom and hear from them, "Everything's gonna be all right. Come snuggle up into bed." But then when you get into the bed, it turns out that they're actually giant tarantula spiders waiting to eat you right on the spot. Well, if that feels too graphic, that's how a lot of us feel like the year 2020 has gone, is it not? I think that was actually one of my dreams as a kid. It was frightening. They told their babies to feast on him. It was frightening, but that seems to be the way to sum up the year 2020. Grotesque monsters, beasts, and horrifying nightmares that seem to be just on repeat. Well, oddly enough, that's also the backdrop of today's passage. Today we're entering into what some have called the most important chapter in the entire Old Testament. Others have called it psychedelic, a trip. Others have said it's flat out disturbing. Daniel 7 is the last chapter we're going to look at in the Daniel mixtapes, and I know, truly sad. But it's the last one we're covering because the moment you read it, you realize you don't want to read anymore. It's horrific. And so everything changes in Daniel 7. And so far, we've been scooting along reading powerful story after story of Daniel and his 3 friends, Ananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. And they're making a difference in this foreign government. And it's these kings who seem to have just had these scary dreams all the time, and we can just sit on the sidelines and laugh at them, like, hate to be you, and then blam, Insidious comes at us. So Daniel 7 hits, and all of a sudden, everything changes. And so today we're going to watch this horror movie of a passage in 3 ways. We're going to look at it: the beasts, the brute, the boast. Let me say that again. The beasts, the brute, and the boast. As I said, from chapter 7 onward in the book of Daniel, everything changes. Up until now, we're dealing with king's dreams, but now Daniel is in a dream. We also have time traveled back in time to when Belshazzar was king, and so this passage chronologically happens between chapters 4 and 5, as it's in the first year of the king's reign. But the biggest shift that happens is when the style of the writing changes. Daniel 7 shifts from a narrative history style storytelling to this apocalyptic genre. And to understand any writing, we need to understand its purpose. Genres help us understand the purpose. And so, for example, we just instinctively know that a sentence that begins with, "The stars will fall from heaven, the sun will cease its shining, and the moon will drip blood," probably does not end with, and the rest of the country had partly cloudy with scattered showers, right? Like one is apocalyptic, the other is a weather forecast. And so that means that to understand apocalyptic literature, we need to know what it is trying to do to us and for us. And so apocalyptic literature is like this author trying to write with a paintbrush. Like you can't interpret things literally with a paintbrush. It's as if you were to walk into an art gallery with these frightening images and you walk out going, oh, that makes sense. No, it absolutely does not make sense, which is why of the 5 commentaries I read leading up to this, none of them agree on what the beasts actually are. But that's exactly what people try to do with this stuff. This book and the book of Revelation are the 2 books that seem to characterize apocalyptic writing the best. And the problem that we always run into when reading the book of Revelation and these last couple chapters of the book of Daniel is when we try to read Revelation in these chapters of Daniel literally. The apocalypse appeals to our senses. Like we're meant to see, we're meant to hear, we're meant to smell these strange beasts. Not prognosticate about the end of the world. Like when you go down that route, that's when you get people predicting the world's going to end in 1982, which they did, and then in 1994, which they did, then in year 2000, and then too many other dates. I mean, there was one man, Harold Camping, predicted that the world would end 3 times in 1 year. And I don't know if you know, but that did not, in fact, happen. And you would think the fact that it did not happen would have had him reconsider his giftings, that he might not be able to do this. But guess what? No, that didn't stop him. He predicts the end of the world a year later. And again, it did not happen. So you got to love that guy's perseverance. No, this seems silly because we're not meant to read these books literally, but we're meant to be overwhelmed, as Daniel was, by the revelation of the Ancient of Days and of the coming of the Son of Man. And so let's look at the beasts in this vision. Verse 2 says, "Behold, the 4 winds of heaven were being stirred up out of the great sea." And now numbers are important in apocalyptic literature. They have symbolism. So number 4 symbolizes the 4 points of a compass, meaning every possible wind and direction. And it's this symbol of completeness. So the whole earth was stirring up something monstrous. And for the ancients, the sea was a place that the Leviathan and other creatures lived. And then verse 3, "And the 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, and are different from one another." And these monsters were terrifying. They're not merely, terrifying like you think of and because they're dangerous, like the crocodile or the T-Rex. Rather, they're terrifying because they're evil and opposed to God. That these are agents of chaos and destruction. This is not PG-13 Jurassic Park but it's R-rated The Nun or the scary clown from It. These monsters are pure evil. And so the first beast in verse 4 is like a lion with eagle's wings. Now, excuse the terrible pictures that we have up here. I'm not sure if these will help or make things worse. But they make you think of these terrible beasts, but then you hear of a lion with wings and you think, okay, that doesn't sound too bad. But then as I looked, it says its wings were plucked off. Well, that was a little off-putting, just tearing someone's wings off. Then the second beast was like a bear, but it was raised up on one side. And whether that's because he was poised to spring or because he was grotesquely deformed like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, we don't know. It had a mouth full of ribs of its previous victim, but yet it was told to rise and devour some more. Okay, that's getting darker. All right, the third beast in verse 6 is part leopard, part bird with 4 heads. Now, tell me if this does not sound like the animal that you made up in kindergarten. Said, all right, it's gonna be a leopard, get that? And it's gonna be a bird, and it's gonna have 4 heads. And his name is Carl. But why is Carl built this way? Because it's emphasizing the speed and the ferocity at which Carl moves, and because he's impossible to hide from. But then things get really hideous with the 4th beast. In verse 7, and terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth, and it devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And so this beast is different. It's incredibly strong. It has iron teeth. It has 10 horns, and the horns are symbols of strength in the Bible. And so that 10, though, symbolizes this massively multiplied strength. But then there's a little baby horn that springs up, and at first you're like, oh, that's so cute, a little baby horn. Oh, it's so cute. But no, it's frightening. Its horn had eyes like a man and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Please excuse these terrible renditions of these pictures. These are terrible. But I believe what Daniel saw was far more disturbing. And so it's no wonder Daniel wasn't scared of the lion's den when he was desensitized by all these night terrors of visions of horror movies like Hereditary and such. This monstrosity makes those lions appear like the cat from Puss in Boots. Good kitty. He's so adorable, right? But what are we to do with these beasts? The response is we only read these verses 1 through 8 should be, what did I just see? What was that? And that's the same response many have after watching the Dallas Cowboys play this game called football. But we don't have to worry about trying to figure out what these beasts actually are or what they're doing, because the beast is the brute. Later in this passage, we're told explicitly in verse 17, these 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. And these beasts represent kings and their kingdoms in which we live. And so the vision declares that our world is being run by a succession of fearsome monsters that will go from bad to worse, each one more frightening than the other. And these kings and their kingdoms are so bad that they're depicted by horrific beasts, and they're led by a brute, which if you Google that word, the description literally reads, a savagely violent person or animal. Oh, that seems about very appropriate. Well, that is just lovely, isn't it? Daniel is a little more reserved than I am. He says in verse 15 after seeing this, as for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I think that was just his cleaned up version of his panic attack, breathing into a paper bag, eating all the kids' Halloween candy. This is alarming. What he just heard and what you and I just heard are that the world governments are evil kingdoms. And if you think things are bad under the Babylonians, just wait. It's going to get worse. Oh, fantastic. So this isn't the health and wealth gospel, is it? That everything is just going to work out splendidly. Oh, well, if you think so, well, Kenneth Copeland has a word for you. The temptation that every person has is to want to identify which 4 earthly kingdoms match up with the beast. And so especially since the first beast is clearly Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, the lion and the eagle are both used by Jeremiah in a description of Nebuchadnezzar, which is just spot on because Nebuchadnezzar literally thought he was a beast, but then he praised God and his mind returned to him. And it says in verse 4, and the mind of man was given to it. And so nearly everyone believes at least this first beast does represent Babylon. And if that's Babylon, what superpowers come after Babylon? And who do we identify these beasts with? And so now, as I said, not many agree on this, but a common understanding of the order is Babylon with the lion and eagle, we'll call it illegal, and then the Medo-Persian Empire with the creepy bear, and then Greece with Karl the leopard and its wings, because the speed at which Alexander the Great conquered, and then the 4th beast is Rome. Again, guesses. Which would be nice and lovely just to have this all neatly wrapped up in a bow. Well done, good job. We can all rest easy since those beasts are no longer around here today. We're good. But these attributes of speed and ferocity and brutality apply equally well to something like Nazi Germany and many other warlike nations before and after them. Notice the angel doesn't clarify the identity of the kingdoms. He could have just easily told Daniel who is coming, but he doesn't. And so a proper understanding of the vision does not resolve in the question of who did it. It's not the game of Clue. In fact, I would go as far to argue that any attempt to identify the various beasts actually direct us away from the proper interpretation of the vision. And so such approaches assume that the rule of the beast describes the way that the world used to be up until someone like Antiochus Epiphanes, who was truly an abomination, who sacrificed a pig in God's holy altar and was literally burning Bibles. But even though Antiochus is terrible, seeing this Daniel passage as solely relating to kings and kingdoms in the past assumes that things are supposedly different and less beastly today. But then we can think of the Cambodian killing fields and the genocide in Rwanda. Or maybe we could even look more inward and see the myriad of ways that the United States has legally killed and murdered and abused and demeaned all types of human beings. Specifically the Native Americans when the settlers first came here. So happy Thanksgiving. And then they needed labor for all the cotton fields and partook in the transatlantic slave trade. But just when we were tempted to think, well, that was then, I'm so glad we've moved far beyond that, then just look at all the abuse that has happened in the year 2020. We can look at all the ugly ways that we treat human beings, particularly the most vulnerable, whether that's the sheer fact that we have to say Black Lives Matter, or whether that's the elderly in regards to this virus, or it's the rhetoric of our elected officials. This past year alone, I've heard so many people say, I thought we were better than this. No, we're not. We're not better. This is our past, but this is also our present. And this is the moral of Daniel 7. Just when you think, if we can just get past this king, if we can just outlive this monstrosity, another king is going to rise up behind it, and they'll just keep spouting up. This is also our future. The identification of the beast as 4 past empires is the exact opposite of the message of the apocalyptic literature. For apocalyptic writers, nothing less than the beginning of a new age can change this world. And until then, the darkness will not lift significantly. The fact that there are 4 beasts represents completeness rather than a particular number of world empires. And on such view, this message of Daniel 7 is that life in the present age will always be this way until the end of age. I mean, it's striking if you look at it that superpowers of our day still represent themselves by these predatory animals, such as like the Russian bear or the American eagle. Though Benjamin Franklin argued we should change our national animal to a turkey, but that idea didn't seem to get much movement. I wonder why. But the point is, the beasts may change their shape as the centuries pass, but their violence and lust for power continues. Nebuchadnezzar turns into Darius, who becomes Alexander the Great, and then Antiochus Epiphanes, and then Nero, and Domitian, and Hitler, and Stalin, and who today? Now, we live in America, and we're in a very peculiar position. Like, in that day, Jews or Christians had little to no direct influence in their community's political process. But you and I today wield significant power in ours. And if we want to know how to seek the welfare of the community, how to care for the most vulnerable, or love our neighbor, I mean, it happens through voting and lobbying and marching and protests. And so in some sense, like, we're all freaked out by these evil monsters and that represent these kingdoms and authorities. But it should be noted that we sit in a position of authority in our government. Like, we have all the more reason to heed this passage because we can easily become beastly in the way that we rule. To avoid or dismiss political engagement is to forgo an important responsibility to love our neighbors and to promote the righteousness and justice that are the foundation of God's throne. And to simply just stay out of it means we're forfeiting the duty to push back against evil, and we let the beast have his day. We live in a world where there is good reason to have trouble sleeping at night. But what's more frightening than realizing you may be the beast? But the focus of this chapter is not on the beast nor on the brute, but it's on the boast of the Almighty. Like, this passage is not here to give us more nightmares, thank you, but to calm our nightmares. The focus of Daniel 7 is on the surety and the certainty and the guarantee of the final victory of the saints. Like, this is the boast that no matter how evil these kingdoms may become, there will be justice and God will win the final victory. Look at verse 9. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. The Ancient of Days. I mean, what a name. Like, one who took his seat amid this chaos, meaning he's not pacing around fearfully worried. He sits because it's all under control. And his clothing was white as snow and hair like pure wool, revealing his purity. And the throne had flames with wheels of burning fire. Makes you think of Moses, the burning bush. God the Father is the Ancient of Days. And then in verse 11, and as I looked, I saw the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to the bury with fire. And then comes verse 13, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and he was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Whew! I mean, do you hear the hope in that? The beast will have its day, but there is an Ancient of Days who will outlast, and outcrush these monsters fast. Like, the angel is not fixed on the identity of the beast, but on the certainty of the final victory of the saints. It's in this picture that we had all these beasts, that the beasts are really just the mere backdrops to these two main characters that are right here. The Ancient of Days, who gives true dominion to this man who rides on the clouds And only God rides on clouds. And this man is referred to as the Son of Man, which was Jesus' favorite term to refer to himself. Jesus is both Son of God and Son of Man. He is the mediator between God and man. And so that all peoples of all nations, of all languages, this global kingdom will worship him. I mean, this is apocalypse now. We like to think of prophets foretelling of some things that happen in the future, but lots of what the prophets do is not just foretelling, but forthtelling, revealing the true nature of things as they are now. Revealing what the word revealing there is what the word apocalypse actually means. It's the great reveal, the pulling back of the curtain. It's as if Daniel is taking us into the upside down world of the kingdom, that behind all these evil kingdoms are evil forces. But behind and over them are all these legions of angels and the king of the angelic armies, Jesus himself. Daniel 7 is urging us to see the two kingdoms always present with us. And if we think these beasts are frightening, what do we do with the one who could just finger snap them all away? The beasts only have a limited amount of time. It says a time and a season. But one day, someday, God will end it. The Son of Man has all authority and power, and are we rightly afraid of standing on the wrong side of that king? True world dominion belongs exclusively to God, and all others who seek it will be cut short in their path. And this is good news for the oppressed. Apocalyptic literature proclaims a theology of hope to those whom the world has marginalized. It reminds us that God is presently on the throne and that he will ultimately triumph. Though propagandists proclaim that the resistance is futile, the apocalyptic writer refuses to be assimilated into this world's way of thinking. And the good news doesn't just stop at the kingship of Jesus. The good news is also that the Son of Man doesn't use his political power to squash his people, but to love and to serve them. Mark 10:45, Jesus says the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. I mean, if that's shocking, it should be. A king who says, not that you serve me, but I serve you is wild. But then to give his life as a ransom or to pay for you, it's almost too good to be true. I mean, Eugene Peterson says it this way: the Son of Man has dinner with the prostitute, stops off for lunch with the tax collector, wastes time blessing children, heals unimportant losers, ignores high-achieving Pharisees and influential Sadducees, and ultimately he hung and was pierced and was bleeding on a cross and died and was buried. Surely this is the most ungodlike acts of all time. But it's by this grace that we see an even more beautiful king that we can't even fathom. That the Son of Man who rides clouds would die for you, would die for me. Like, that should give me all the hope in the world. Like, this is the true mixtape of God's love for you. That the Son of Man who rides clouds serves you and dies for you. Do you know him? Do you trust him? Hear this love song being played out for you. This is the mixtape of God's love for you. We invite you to listen to it, of what he's doing for you. We invite you into his presence now. Let's pray.